For this session, we will be talking, just going over the basics and kind of skimming through it because of the amount of time. But we definitely, after the end of this session, I really hope that everyone is able to learn something with error handling and actually implement it into their Power Automate flows or logic apps if you use that. So about me, so my name is Josh Cook, and I'm an integration developer at Interpipeline. It's a energy company in Canada, Alberta, and I am a Microsoft MVP in business applications. So actually, my day, I usually am in Azure using Logic Apps and integration services, but on my free time, I'm always in the Power Platform using every single part of it and very passionate about it. I'm actually a super user on the Power Automate community forums. So if you have any questions or if your flows are broken and you need some help or if you're stuck somewhere, the community forum is definitely a place to go. There's so many super users on there, and I think our answer rate is like above 60 or 70% within 24 hours. So you get answers really quick there. You can scan my QR code right there. It looks like a really weird QR code. It does work. It'll bring you to my link tree, which has links to my blog, LinkedIn, Twitter. Follow me anywhere you like. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, that's just send me an invite. And a little bit about me personally is I actually have ADHD. So if you see my storytelling going a little wonky, like at the bottom there, don't worry, I will revert back to the top end. So I try to stay on the top end, but sometimes it goes a little crazy. Blockchain is actually one of the first technologies I really got into. I actually built the blockchain, and I'm actually really into a lot of cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin and a lot of the altcoins or like the lower coins that nobody's really ever heard of, but they might come into play in real world at some point. I'm also really big into space. So I used to like watching space documentaries and stuff like that, but I've actually got a couple telescopes recently, and it's been amazing looking through that. I'm trying to get my son into it. He's going to be 3 years old very soon here, so he actually likes looking at the moon, which is really nice. Gaming. So I used to game on the Xbox all the time, and since getting married and having a family, I don't game that much anymore. Mainly just on the Switch with like Nintendo and stuff like that, and Mario Maker with my son, just small things like that. I do want to get back into Xbox though. Definitely my favorite system. So for today's agenda, just going to be going over like what is error handling, and basically we're going to use TriCatch Finally for that, and we're going to go over what that is and why we should use it, the structure of how to use it inside of Power Automate, and then we're going to go through some demos and Q&A. So what is error handling? So I actually like to treat my errors like I do my Pokemon, and I like to catch them all. So I don't want to leave an error unturned or not caught. It messes up with processes later on down the road. So what is it? So we're going to acknowledge the error. So even if we don't know what the error is, we want to you want to think that your flow will never fail, but it will. Even if you don't know what the error is or might be, you still want to acknowledge and handle it in some way, and I'll show that in the later demo. We also want to deal with the logic, like logic to deal with the error. So that could be logging the error in like a SharePoint list, or even sending the error off in an email or a Teams message, just to acknowledge that the error is there, and then the logic to deal with it. So if you have a support team that you want to send it off to, that makes perfect sense. So then you can do it that way. And then lastly, you want to gracefully finish the run. So what that means is usually when there's an error in Power Automate or in your flow, the flow run, if you look at the history, it says failed. Now, in most cases, you kind of want it to do that, but in other cases where you do handle the error properly, and maybe you fix it, or maybe you send it back to the person that's doing the request or the process, you might want to show that run as successful. So maybe you want to do that instead of showing an error. So all of this sounds great, but how do we actually do this inside Flow? So we use TriCatch Finally. So a really high overview, because TriCatch Finally is usually used in like programming and like actual like dev code. Excuse me. So when I actually come from a dev background, and I never actually thought we could implement TriCatch Finally or anything like that in Power Automate. I was very wrong. I'm in the very beginning stages of my Power Platform career, I guess. I didn't implement any error handling, and it bites you in the butt later on. It might not, but it might. And if it does, then it's just a pain to figure out how to fix it and deal with the error, especially if it's such a if the errors come way down the road, you might not even remember how the process works. So to understand what TriCatch Finally is, we got to understand what try is. And so try is basically the initial steps or actions that we want to basically run within the process. So if you have flows right now that have no error handling, basically everything in that flow is going to be your try. So then what is the catch? So the catch basically catches any errors that happen in the try. So if something bad happens in try, or some data quality is messing things up and there's an error, this is what catch is going to do. Catch is going to grab that error and it's going to do something with it. And no matter if there's an error or not, if try does not have an error, or if try does have an error, you're always going to want to do a finally, and because that finally is basically you want to it's basically running all the steps, or sorry, it's basically what you want to run after everything, no matter what. So if try happens correctly and you don't catch anything, you still want to do finally. But if you catch something, you still want to do finally. And to understand this a little bit easier, there's a great analogy that I like to use, and this is basically, I use this because of COVID, because I can't go anywhere. So in my example, I'm going to go on my vacation, and it starts today. So I'm going to go to my nice beach island that you see there. So how am I going to get there? I'm going to drive. So driving to my beach vacation in my nice Cybertruck, like Tesla, I'm driving there, and that's my try. Something happens. Now this could be maybe it breaks down. Maybe I get pulled over by a police car. Now I don't know why I'm getting pulled over. I can get a speeding ticket. Maybe my taillights burn out, maybe something. I don't know what it is. Regardless of what it is, I'm going to get to my beach vacation, or I'm going to get to my destination. So that's going to be my finally. So my finally is getting to my beach vacation, regardless if I get a ticket or not, or if he lets me go, or if he just pulled me over because he wanted to say hi. Whatever it is, after the fact, I'm getting to my beach vacation. So why should we use it? Now, I really want people in the chat to let me know if any of you have seen this email before. If you build flows or Power Automate, whatever you want to call them, and they have failed before, you probably have seen this email. Now, this email looks great and it sounds great, and this is originally what I thought was great when I was first using Microsoft Flow at the time, but Power Automate, and I was like, oh, that's sweet. If it fails, Microsoft's going to let me know. The problem is that Microsoft lets you know, but it lets you know maybe like a day. It could be a couple of days. It could be even just maybe an hour, but it also could be a week later that you get this email. So yeah, I've actually gotten this email like about a week later. So I had some flows fail on Monday, and I had no idea they failed because there's no error handling, and it just kind of failed. And then on like Thursday or Friday, I get an email, hey, your flows failed. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I click on, it tells me the name of the flow right there. I go click on it. I check. I'm like, wait a second. This flow has been failing since Monday. Now I'm in a panic, right? Because now I'm trying to figure all this out, and definitely not the way to go. So the point I'm trying to get across is that all flows will fail eventually. We just have to know how to handle those errors, because if you don't know how to handle them, they're just going to pile up, and again, you might not even know that it's failing. Oh, again, why should we use it? Send alerts to better support failures, which saves money. You can monitor the flows, support the flows. So that's, again, sending a support team's notification on failures, send notifications to users for visibility, and error handling also gives you more control because it captures the failing data, which can actually help you build better flows in the future, because you'll be able to know how to like kind of like what's expected of certain scenarios. So yeah, so basically the flow structure. So how do we implement this in Power Automate? We use this action called a scope. Now, if you haven't used scopes before, they are awesome, even if you don't use TriCatch Finally or anything like that, because basically you can put a bunch of different actions inside a scope. So it'll clean your flow up. So even if you have a couple of processes like within your flow, and you want to kind of group it together to make it more meaningful, or if somebody else is coming in and checking it out, you might want to like kind of guide them, like, oh, maybe this portion does the onboarding and this portion sends approvals. So you might want to have two different scopes for that. In this case, we're going to use scopes for doing our TriCatch Finally. So we're going to have a try block, a catch block, and a finally block. And the way we do the TriCatch Finally in here is that we use this setting in Power Automate called configure run after. Now this, and I will showcase this more in a demo, but basically what it's going to do is you're basically going to configure the catch block to only execute if the try block, the one above it, has failed or skipped or timed out. What that's going to do is that's going to be able to make it run only if there's an error, because if that's technically what's going to happen. Finally, in the finally block, and I've actually forgotten to do this a couple of times, finally, you want to also use configure run after, because by default, the scopes and actions, they run only if the above action is successful. So in this case for finally, we want to run finally anytime. If there's a failure, if it's successful, so we want to run it no matter what. So that's why we also use configure run after to basically check mark all those different options there. So on to the demo. So I will showcase a demo here on it. So if I go here, so I'm going to create a brand new flow just called TriCatch Finally structure. So I'm going to hit create. Now again, this is just going to be the structure. Also, I'm going to show a really cool way to throw an error and not actually terminate the process, and I'll show that in a second. So again, we're going to use scopes. So I can easily just type in scope, and there's scope right there. And immediately I like to change the name. So I'm going to put this as try. And I'm going to just do it 3 more times. So also a quick thing, you can actually click in this control here because it's part of the control group, and it's right there, scope. So now we're going to name this one catch. And then the last one here will be finally. So now we have the actions. Now we got to do the configure run after. So basically, how do we do that? So, and every action, there is the 3 dots here. And this is where you have a configure run after here. So that's perfect. So click that. Again, like I said, successful is always by default. What I want to do is this is it's basically saying, I'm doing this on the catch block. It's basically saying if the scope try is successful, we're going to run this. Notice as I add check marks here, it's going to tell me what it's going to do, when this is going to run. So I do not want it to run if it's successful, only if it's failed, skipped, or timed out. So that's going to do is now if try failed, and now you can see that with the red arrow there. And if you highlight over here, it tells you, it doesn't tell you exactly, I really wish it told you what the values were, but it doesn't. It just says you'll have to check under configure run after to view that. So now the finally, which is the one I always forget, is because if you don't do this, it's most likely not going to run. So you have to configure run after here and check mark all of them. Now, be aware if anyone does this, if you move these actions around, it breaks the configure run after. So this is another reason why I like to use scopes, because if you're using this on individual actions, like let's say if you have a variable or something, and then you're moving that variable around, every time you move it, it breaks that connection. So in scopes, like if I have a bunch of stuff in my try and I'm dragging them around, it's not going to break anything in here, as long as I don't move catch like above try and vice versa. So anyway, what I want to do is I want to showcase something so quickly. So if I put in the catch here, there's 2 ways to kind of like fail your flow if you need to. So I'm going to showcase one here. It's called terminate. I did that wrong. So it's in control, again, the category, and it's called terminate. So if anyone's used this before, I'm sure you know what it does, but these values here, pointless, they don't do anything. You can't do anything with it because you'll see why in a second. So basically, if I put this actually in my try, it's going to fail. So my try should fail. My catch technically should run. But what we're going to find out here is that it's not going to run. So flow run failed. That's what I wanted. is I'm failing that flow with the terminate action. But here's where the weird thing is. My catch says it's skipped. It's not going to run because terminate works differently than a regular error. Terminate terminates the whole process, the whole flow. So be aware of that if you're going to use terminate. And if you need to use something where, again, if something's happening and you're doing some data validation within your try before you want to maybe update CDS, update SharePoint, whatever you want to do, you want to do some data validation first. If something's wrong, you might not want to terminate the flow. You might want to just like show that there's an error. So how do we do that? So if I get rid of, because you might want to run the catch block. And again, using terminate, your catch isn't going to run. So a really cool way, and I'll be curious to know if any of you have other ideas of how to force an error. I'd love to hear it also in the chat, which I'll check after. But the way I've always been doing it, and I've never really seen anyone do this before. So what I'm going to use a variable. So we use a variable. I'm just going to name it force error, and I'll just name it force error right here. And I'm going to name it. I'm going to put it as a integer, and you'll see why in a second. So if I go in my try and I go set my variable now. So here's my set variable. You always have to initialize first and then set. So I'm going to select my force error here. And if I go to my expression tab, I'm not going to do anything crazy, so don't worry. But I'm just going to put true. And what that's going to do is I'm going to use a Boolean expression value here, true. So why is that important? Because when I run this, now everything works properly. So what happens here? So I'm setting the variable with a value that can't be set. It's basically I'm trying to put a true value inside an integer, which is a number. So it fails, and then it pushes it to my catch. I can't open it. There's nothing inside my catch. There's no actions in there, but you could see that it ran. So if I had something in here to catch some errors or to do something with that error, I would be able to do it in there. And then finally, you'd run it no matter what. So this is all great and everything. Now let's see a real use case of this. So I do want to show a use case that actually, it's a smaller use case that is a real use case. But anyway, so what, and actually was in my organization before. So we had a form that stakeholders could fill out to add them, like to add their users to like their Power Apps and stuff like that. And what we did is we just used the form to add them to the environment, like a CDS environment. And it also gave them, it also added them to an Azure Active Directory group. So that could also be attached to licensing. It could be also attached to even access to an environment as well. So the problem is that when so I can even showcase this. So here's the flow. So this is my form here. What I'm basically saying is, give me some email addresses separated by a semicolon. And how does the flow work? This is all attached to a flow. So here's the regular flow, no error handling. So I have my form here. It's when a response is submitted, and I'm getting the response. That's the typical form trigger in action. I'm composing the user email. Compose action, you can put anything in there. You can use expressions in there. Love it. I love compose. What I'm doing is I'm actually, if I just, I'm going to copy this out and paste it into the comments here so we can read it a little better. So basically, what am I doing here? So a little sketchy, but so I'm splitting the get response details. This is that question of email address. So I'm splitting each email address. If you can see that there on that semicolon. So I'm splitting each email address on the semicolon. So now it's going to basically take that array or that list of emails and put it and basically have one email per loop here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to make sure that that email address is in my Office 365 users, because I don't want to be giving access to external users at this point for this use case at least. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing that so I can validate that they are part of my Office 365 and get the UPN, even though their email address usually is the UPN, but it doesn't matter. So basically then I'm just adding them to this Active Directory group, and that's going to give them licensing, access to environments, access to a bunch of different things. Then I'm just going to send an email off to whoever fills out the form about all the users that were added. So great, let's see this in action. So if I go my form here, And I do have my first pass. I'll just copy that, go back. I'm going to paste that in there. So now I have a bunch of users I'm going to add. I hit submit. So if I go back to my flow, not that one, it's this one here. Back. So 9 seconds ago, it has failed. I wonder why. So user not found. Okay, yeah. So again, there's my flow. 4 users that detected 4 email addresses. It looks like this one has succeeded properly. There's no errors. If I go to next failed, it looks like the second iteration failed. I see. The person that actually, it's not an actual email. It's a first name, last name. And the next failed, same thing. So it's just data validation, wrong data. So again, they're not being added to the group. And if you look, because there's an error in here, there is no email being sent at all. So the person that fills out the form has no idea that this is failing or that the users that they're doing are even being added in there. So how do we add error handling to this? So usually I would build this on the fly, but for the sake of time, I do have basically the same flow. I'm just gonna disable this flow, turn off. Gotta love this new message. Check this out. It's basically saying, hey, there's a potential problem with your flow. Yeah, it's turned off. So if I go over here, here's my other flow. It's turned off. I'm going to turn it on now. This is the same flow, just with error handling. So if I hit edit, just to show what's going on here. So basically, we have the same type of thing, except I have 2 new things here. These are 2 variables I'm using. They're array variables. So I'm basically saying valid. So I'm going to put all valid emails in here. I'm going to put all invalid emails in this one. So I have 2 variables, valid and invalid. So now I have my try. So in my try, what am I doing in my try? So I'm basically doing the same thing with that, with my split expression to get each individual email. And then same thing with the apply to each, but here's where it gets interesting. So my apply to each, same thing's happening where I'm grabbing the current user, the current email, except now I'm doing a parallel branch. The way you do that is you just basically, when you're hitting a new action, you can do parallel branch. What parallel branch does is it basically runs these 2 actions the same time, like when it needs to, if it's going down. But in this case, since I'm using a catch, I'm basically saying if I go in my configure run after here, I'm only, so when my get user profile has failed, skipped, or timed out, I'm gonna run my catch, which basically just appends, because it is an array, so append just means add. So I'm just adding the invalid email to that array, and I'll show why later in a second. So, but if it is successful, and if I just, there's no point in doing this, but again, get user profile, if it's successful, that's where I'm going to go in this branch. So what this is going to do is it's going to do the same thing as before, add the member to the group, but also I'm appending that email to the valid array. Now, why is this all important? So when I close this off, and here's my finally. So again, with my finally, I'm just going to confirm because I always forget. It is all selected. So again, I want to make it run no matter what. So again, so now what am I doing? Just to showcase this better, I hate that it does that. So what I'm doing is I'm basically grabbing the length of the valid array. What this is doing, so because it's an array, the length expression is going to count how many like items are in that array or list. So in this case, I'm doing that because, and I'm doing that for invalid and valid. The reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want to send an email off to the person if there's no invalid emails. So just to showcase this, so condition if valid emails. So for if the outputs of that of this up here, the compose. So let's say if this equals 2, so there's 2 valid emails. So if it's greater than 0, which it would be, then I'm going to, and it's funny, I'm doing it this way because it wouldn't let me reference the variable. If I click in here in the dynamic content, it does that sometimes. There's no variable, even if I wonder if I type it actually. Yeah, that's weird. Why it doesn't show up. But so what I did is I just actually added that variable to a compose. Again, compose is awesome. So I'm doing this, and now I'm basically just sending an email to the person who filled out the form saying, hey, these users have been added to the group. And those are the valid emails. Now, if I go over here into the other condition, it's going to do almost the same thing. I'm just doing the same thing. I'm grabbing an invalid array, and I'm basically going to send the same email almost, just saying users not added. These users have not been added to the group. So let's test this out. So if I go back to my form here, and I do have some new users I can test this on. Second pass right here. I'll copy this. And then I'll go back to my form. And I'm going to paste in this new string here. Okay, fingers crossed. So let's go back to the flow and see how that worked. Back. And 7 seconds ago, and I'm hearing dinging in my headset, meaning I'm getting some emails, which is good. So it's saying my flow was ran successfully. And if I go in here, my try, we see that the same type of thing is happening where there's a failed record in there. So for the first one, everything's good. Added to the group, got appended to that valid email list. That's this email here, demo user at flow.delete.ca. Next failed, that's the second one. Again, they don't exist in Office 365, so they get pushed over here. Appends this email here, spam@email.com, to the invalid array. And it's going to do that for every single record. If this one's failed, it's going to unknown at .user, and then the next one is successful, which it puts into the valid. And if we scroll down, we should be getting see. So now we're checking the length of valid 2, and the length of invalid, it should also be 2. And then we're just sending the emails off. And I do have my email open in another tab here, which I will show. I'll bring them over. So here is the, once it loads. So this is the users not added, and it's telling me exactly the users that were not added, spam and unknown user. And then my other one here is the success users have been added, and these are the correct emails here. And just to showcase that I'm not lying, if I go into my Azure here, I go to groups, and then here's the one I'm adding everyone to in here, and I go members. So and there's everyone here from the first run, Joanna and Henrietta, and Flow support, and demo user is the second run. So that concludes my demos. I will go back to my slides here. I do have something else on here. So yeah, demo time. So the key takeaways are configure run after. I've forgotten to do the finally, and even sometimes with the catch, you always want to test to make sure that everything is going good, that everything's running properly. You want to, and again, if you want to test to make sure that if an error happens, the other ones run, use that variable technique to force an error, just to see if everything runs correctly. And then make sure finally, again, I've forgotten, make sure all those things are checkmarked for finally, and use terminate when you need to terminate the whole flow processing. If you want to stop everything and just fail it, use that, and then use the variable technique that I showed to keep the processing going and then also force an error. So that does conclude my session. Thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to looking at the chat here if you guys have any questions. And I do thank you. And again, connect with me if you like. I will accept it. So let's check out the chat here. All right.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Josh.
No problem.
I think there's certainly a few points there that wasn't fully aware of. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hoping that there is some things there that everyone found useful.
I think the important thing for me is, someone submitting something and then expecting a flow to do something. If that flow fails, but one, the user isn't aware of it failing, and two, IT not aware of it failing. So it sort of sits in that limbo world. So yeah, it's really good. It's a bit different, isn't it, to having a sort of a web application or an error message prompted on the screen, and for one it hasn't done what it's meant to have done. So yeah, really exactly. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I don't think there's any questions.
Yeah, I'm just reading the comments. Yeah, thanks everyone for being so active on the chat there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one to add to the best practice toolbox, isn't it? You know, just better way of coding flows. So yeah, really good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.